One of my most popular videos on my channel is one called Structuring Your Tracks, or at least structuring tracks for TV film placements. And I think there's a lot of misunderstandings and just bad information out there about how to structure your tracks. Some people feel that there's an actual formula that you can just follow and your tracks will be ready to go. That's not necessarily as simple as it is. Essentially, there are a couple of, I call them golden rules, like bigger rules that you should be following. And how you get to these golden rules, that's really up to you. You can use multiple different placements, different structures, different ways that you put your tracks together. You can have choruses and verses and bridges in various places. You can get really original and really creative with it. But basically, you should be following some of these golden rules if you want to make sure that your tracks are going to be very useful for a music library or supervisor. Number one, attention grabbing intro. Okay, so I teach this to everybody in my master course, everybody in the syndicate. Something you need to be aware of is when a library or a supervisor or a video editor, somebody who's interested in selecting your music to place in anything, they're usually going through a large list of tracks, or at least an album, like 12, 14 tracks, right, on an album. And usually what they'll do is, if they can see the WAV file, they will sometimes skip around through it and kind of just listen to the choruses, okay? So sometimes you just need to make sure you have really great sounding choruses. But often what happens, and I've been in edit bays where this happens, is they'll just hit play, listen for a couple of seconds, hit the down arrow. Literally 3 seconds at the most sometimes. So they're looking for a particular sound. If they don't catch it, if they don't hear what they're listening for, they move on to the next. Or if it has just kind of a slow fade in intro and they're not even getting to the beef of the music, they're not even going to listen to the rest of it. They don't have time to do that. Just go to the next. And they're literally hitting the down arrow very quickly. So what I always say to sort of hijack this process for yourself to make sure that your track stands out is create an attention grabbing intro. At least get something that kind of is an exclamation mark that says, listen to me, I have something to say, okay? And that attention grabbing intro should say something about the emotional vibe, the tension, the sort of the emotional place, the tone that your cue is delivering. You should be getting into that emotion immediately. I've heard so many great songs or some great cues submitted. The first 30 seconds are kind of boring though. And then when the chorus hits, I'm like, wow, this is such an incredible chorus and I have all this emotion coming at me. But if I was just giving the song a couple of seconds listen, I would have skipped this thing and I would have not discovered the gold here. So don't do yourself a disservice by having a kind of a boring, meandering, putting a pad down, slow fade in, like you're not really sure where the track is going. Again, this is functional music we're producing in the TV film licensing business, okay? It's not artist music. It's not music for, psychedelic trips, man. Like, that's not what this is for. It's for delivering specific emotional content and tones to a particular TV show, movie, commercial, radio spot, streaming service, whatever it is, okay? So it's a functional piece of music. That's why we call it production music. So just get right to the beef, the bulk, or at least attention grabbing intro so that you stand out as somebody's going through dozens and dozens of tracks, okay? The second golden rule is just have transitions that sort of ease the listening experience for the listener, okay? So it doesn't matter if you have an attention grabbing intro and then you go chorus, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, out, something like that. Whatever it is you want to do, you can have any variation of structure that you feel is appropriate for your genre and what you're doing. But just make sure if you're going to go from a verse to a chorus and there's kind of a big change in energy and dynamics, have a swell or a swoosh or a drum fill or a stuttering cool thing happening. Just get creative in how you sort of cue your listener into something is going to be changing. And the reason why this is a golden rule is because if your music has really drastic changes and there's not an easy way to make those transitions, it's distracting, right? If you've ever listened to a piece of music and it goes from something kind of relaxing to boom, something really intense, and there wasn't anything to build that bridge to kind of get you to that place, it's really distracting. And having distracting music is a complete no-no in the licensing business. Your music most of the time will be sitting in the background behind dialogue, actors, all that kind of stuff. So if you've got like a track in the background that's essentially like holding up signs going, look at me, listen to me, listen to me, you're getting kicked out of that placement. They're not going to put you there because your track is distracting from the energy or the emotion of the scene. Your track needs to be adding, right? Adding some emotion or sort of enhancing the emotion that's already there with the dialogue. So you just make sure you have these transitional effects. You kind of transition between your parts nicely, neatly, having crashes, impacts, 808 drops. There's so many cool ways to do it, reverse effects, but just make sure that it feels good and it has a nice sort of transition and ease into a big change in your track. Basically the number 3 golden rule that I think is crucial is usually, it's not all the time, but I'd say 90% of the time in my experience in this business, this is how people want their track structured for libraries, is they essentially want the last part of your track to be the biggest part. Okay, so usually you can start out with a nice, big slamming chorus, come down to a verse, come to a next chorus, come to a bridge, build up. But that last chorus, that last part, and literally up until the last bar or measure of your track needs to kind of be a huge crescendo. It needs to really just climb and rise all the way to the top. Many different reasons for this. The main reason why it's so effective and so useful and why it's in demand is because you've already given them a chorus that just starts and stops. You've already given the second chorus that should have a new lead, should have something brand new that is different from the first chorus. That is another golden rule here, is to just make sure if you're going to repeat a verse, cool, repeat it, but have something else that's a little bit different so it stands out as a distinct new part. You don't need to repeat the same thing over and over again. They've got a copy and paste function on their end. They can do that for you if they need to. So just make sure you're not repeating just copy paste like a lot of producers do when they're going to go send a beat off to a rapper or a singer. That's kind of what we do. In this business, you got to be a little bit, it's not much, it's literally like a 7 to 10% more effort kind of a thing, but it will get you in the door and it'll make you more relevant in this business. But that last final crescendo on your last chorus gives an editor that option to rise, right? To really get this lift of emotion, either out of a scene or transition out of a commercial or whatever it is. But you're giving this intensity of like dun 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 bah, right? And then you sort of leave them there at the end with this nice, satisfying, fulfilled crescendo climax that essentially happened. It just feels more satisfying that way. So you're giving them a lot more options to use your track by doing it. And I'm just telling you, even if they don't tell you that's how they want, like if you get accepted by a library, they don't give you sort of the tips that I'm giving you, most of the time, they're going to love that. And if you give a sort of kind of half-assed outro where you're just dun, 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 and you just kind of like lay it, I kind of think of it as like you dropped it on the floor and like there wasn't much of there was no sparkle to it, they're going to ask you to redo it. They're going to say, hey, give me something more on that ending, like a higher note or a crash cymbal, or give me a fill. Like that ending really fell apart. Your ending really needs to feel very satisfactory because those endings, those hit endings, really get a lot of placement. So you got to make sure that you give them that satisfaction, that rise up, and then boom. And lastly, I'd say this is 99% of the time in the business. I don't know if I've ever been asked for anything other than this. You must have a hit ending, a definite hit ending at the end of your tracks, okay? What does that mean? That means you don't have the fade out, where you get the groove and the track and the riff and it's just kind of fading out. No, we don't do that. That's radio records. That's, you got an album you're selling it to the public. Cool, fade out your tracks however you want to. Again, this is production music. Needs to be functional. A definite hit ending means usually there has to be something that hits one time, right? Like a kick, a snare, a crash cymbal, an impact, an 808, an explosion, whatever. And then usually you just need to have, just a note hitting out, ringing out. Sometimes it's just a quick little stab, bump, that kind of a thing. But it definitely needs to be a definite hit ending. Okay, so not the gradual fade out. Most of the time, if people are going to get out of your queue and go into another queue, they're going to want to have that nice clean hit ending, right? So let's say it's like a reality show and there's something humorous that happens in a scene. They're going to use this dun 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 bam, and then they start and they go to the next track, okay? They can't do a fade out and do a fade in to the next track. That's not how it works. It usually sounds really goofy and it's really hard to get that right, especially since tempos are off and the styles are different. So getting these hit endings are really clean. They're really easy for them to be able to place them. And you're going to need those hit endings for when you deliver your sting versions, your alt mixes, that kind of thing, your 30-second cut downs, all that kind of stuff. You're going to need that nice hit ending. Right? It's just a nice, clean end of your track. Okay? So I would say that's one of those things that 99% of the time, which is basically like every single time you submit a track to anything, unless specifically asked, hey, I want at the end to be this nice, 30-second long drone hit or something like that. Unless you're specifically asked for something different, that's most of what you're going to be asked for in this business, and that's what's going to be required of you. So just beat that into your head right now as you're producing your tracks and getting to the part where you want to put that sort of the end on your music and hit bounce. If you don't have that definite hit ending and that crescendo on your last chorus, it's not ready yet. Okay, so just take that extra time and make sure you get that nice satisfactory ending that works. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I know this is a longer video, but those are the golden rules, okay? And so how you get to these rules is really up to you. And whatever genre you're producing, obviously that'll inform how you sort of achieve all of these things. But in my career, that's if I've ever gotten pushback, like if I send a track to a library and like, hey, cool track, but this isn't working, that is working. It's basically these golden things that I get pushed back on, like, hey, the intros, you're taking too long to get to it. That ending doesn't really work for us. Do a little bit more with that crescendo, or hey, you kind of repeated this verse once before. Let's do something different on the second verse. That's usually the feedback that I get. Okay, now that is obviously above having just decent, great sounding licensable tracks. So you do have to have that sort of base level of, does it sound modern? Does it sound loud? Does it sound well mixed? Is it well produced? Do you have great musical ideas? It doesn't sound too cliche, like it's already been done before. Are there some really cool, interesting surprises? Right? There's got to be an element of something that hooks into the listener. So you have to have all that stuff, and that's more basic producing, mixing, and mastering skills. But above that, we're talking about once you have that, there might be a little bit more you can do to make sure that it's really appropriate for the TV film world. And that's what I'm here to help you guys learn how to do. Most producers don't know how to do this stuff. Most of them are doing the copy paste kind of producing, where they create their verse and their chorus and they're like, cool, repeat that 3 times, hit print, we're done. Doesn't work in this business. You will not have a long-term career, and libraries will definitely not be holding on to you if that's the minimal effort that you're putting into your productions. And again, what I'm talking about doesn't require massive amounts of more time. 7 to 10%. This is a small amount more. Adding an extra lead to a verse that you hadn't heard before, how long does that really take? Yeah, you gotta make sure you write a good lead, but writing one extra lead, or maybe adding some more percussion or changing up one thing to just kind of add a little bit of variation with it. We're not talking about a lot here, guys, but we are talking about the difference between full-time income and making beats for people that nobody buys. So again, 7 to 10% of effort can result in a lot more for you down the road in your career. That's what I want to share with you guys today. Thank you so much. Make sure you like the video and subscribe if you haven't already.